joined now by former Labour Party advisor Aisha Hazarika and political sketch writer for The Times, Quentin Letts. Good morning to both of you.
Good morning.
And also joining from Birmingham is author and Professor of Black Studies, Kehinde Andrews. Good morning, Kehinde. Good to have you on the programme this morning. I wish it wasn't for the reason that we've got you on, of course. I wonder what your reaction was to the story that's on the front of all those pages and how you felt when you read it.
To be honest, my reaction was probably a shrug. I'm not sure why people are still surprised that there's racism in the royal family. You would think that after the Meghan Markle debacle, that tour in the Caribbean of Will and Kate, even the fact that, I mean, come on, let's be honest, we have an almost exclusively white family that represents Britain and goes around in the kind of the jewels stolen from empire. By now, we should have understood the British family, the royal family has a real problem with racism, and these things should not surprise us.
Were you not hopeful, though, in the light of the conversation that has been had over the last couple of years, that actually things were moving forward and protocols have been put in place and re-education had happened, that amongst those people that are going to be front and centre of a big event at the Palace, like this one was yesterday, they wouldn't make this sort of conversation, they wouldn't have made these comments?
No, I'm not sure that we've seen anything that would suggest that. I think if you look at the response to Meghan Markle, the interview and all these ideas about racism, she said very clearly she didn't feel supported by the Crown. We've seen how I haven't seen any change at all. But again, I want to stress, I'm not sure why we should expect to. I mean, it came out that the Queen was exempt from race equality legislation up to her death. And this is an institution that is deeply embedded in institutional racism. And these kind of things, and I think what this shows you, and I really want to stress that, look, this is one person, and one person resigning doesn't do anything, because it shows there's a culture in that place where these kind of ideas are totally accepted, that she felt perfectly fine to behave in these ways. It's about what the royal family is as an institution, and unfortunately, the royal family as an institution has a serious problem and may have a fundamental problem it can never escape of institutional racism.
Maybe it's because I'm white, but I was shocked by the questioning, not the fact that it was ignorant and racist, maybe, but the sort of persistence with which, rather than just making the muck up, which would have been bad enough to say, where are you really from, but to go on and keep questioning, seemed to be so fundamentally adrift with the way the rest of the world at least has the ambition to conduct themselves, even if in your experience it doesn't always do that. Is there any comfort to be drawn by the speed with which Prince William condemned it, by which he supported the losing of the job to his godmother? And it does seem akin to me to King Charles, who has worked very hard, certainly publicly, to change that sort of approach in his work with the Prince's Trust and many other things. It seems especially disappointing.
Well, I think a lot of black people would be not surprised even at the insistence. As somebody who, one, is black and two, has an African name, you get this a lot. So actually, when I read the transcript, I was like, that's not something I hadn't experienced. And unfortunately, too many of us have experienced that, because there is very much the idea if your skin is not white in this country, you're not really British, and therefore you must be from somewhere else. So again, for many people in this country, reading that transcript wouldn't have been a surprise. And then I think the problem you have with this from the royal family perspective is, yes, it was swift. Yes, they've got rid of this one person, but this is the worst way to think about racism. This was obviously a person who did something problematic, but it goes to the core of what the institution is. It tells you there is a culture which accepts these kind of conversations. And unfortunately, like I said, what can King Charles do other than abdicate to actually deal with the issue of racism? Honestly, the royal family is so tied into colonial nostalgia. I mean, the king is still the head of state of places like Jamaica. I mean, there's sometimes you just have to say, there are some institutions which are so deeply connected to white supremacy and racism, there is nothing they can do but abolish themselves if they're serious about anti-racism.
I think it would be worth us getting your thoughts, Sean, as well on this, because I'd imagine that you have sort of experience or may have experience of similar things.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, it's not a surprise. I get asked that question quite a lot throughout my life. I've been asked, yeah, and that persistence, or where are you from? And what it says is, if you decode it, is you're not British, or you're not British enough. And you get that all the time, that because of the colour of your skin, you're not quite seen as British as someone else who's white. And what Kehinde says, I think, is really interesting, is it's the confidence in the way she continued, as you said, Kate, she continued to ask those questions. It's a sort of privilege. And what it says is there's a culture that she sort of feels that's fine to talk about that sort of thing. Nobody would pull her up normally about that in her circles.
And is that culture purely racist, or is it speak to sort of and entitlement generally, because never mind, and maybe again this is because I'm white, if I was meeting somebody and those events are always full of small talk and you're searching for things to try and bond with the person for, if somebody was clearly not happy, I would stop anyway, regardless if it was talking about the food. It's a strange sense of entitlement as well as the awful crime of racism,
well,
isn't
just
it?
go back to the circles that she is in, those conversations obviously happen, that sort of attitude happens, as Aisha's nodding there. And I think when you don't have white skin, I think you know that.
Yeah. It's very hard, isn't it, to defend or to what Kindy's saying about the royal family is institutionally racist. It's very hard to sort of defend against that when we see what's happened here, that actually within the fabric of the circles that they're moving in, a conversation like that would be acceptable.
And remember, this is a woman who is very much at the beating heart of the royal family, very close confidant of the Queen. You know, she was very much part of the family. So it comes as no surprise that, you know, if she sort of says things like that, there will be talk. And when you sort of join up the dots, you have the stuff that Meghan Markle spoke out about, completely dismissed by everybody. We're not a racist family. Of course, there can be no racism within the royal family. Everything she said was completely dismissed, including the threats against her. We've just had a senior police officer come out this week and say, actually, there were really serious threats to her life. The point that Kendi made, the Queen exempted herself from race equality laws. And at one point, an actual edict was in the royal family saying, we don't want people of colour, we don't want foreigners, we don't want immigrants working in the palace. They're fine to be domestic staff, but we don't want them to be sort of senior staff. It wasn't really until relatively recently that people of colour have even held, you know, relatively senior offices within the palace. And to the points that Sean and Kendi's made, if you're a person of colour, this comes as no surprise. I mean, I remember we've all had it, just so many incidents. People are like, where are you from? I'm from Glasgow. Where are you really, really from? Glasgow. I know, but where you, like... And it's like, how many times can
and
I...
that persistence, that...
Absolutely. And I've even had people say to me, I know, but where are your grandparents buried? I was like, I literally have no idea where my grandparents are buried, like somewhere in India sort of thing. As if that's the sort of test, it's the sort of blood and soil test of whether you're really... And look, there's some people saying, look, this is just an old woman and this was just a sort of... And look, I've got some sympathy with that, but I do think the royal family have got to get in shape. They're a modern institution. Yeah. We fund them in the middle of a massive cost of living crisis. Get with the programme.
Quentin, is there any defence?
God, this is like getting very Republican, isn't it? I think... you could have called the story, could have headlined it, Ginny voiced old trout steps on landmine, and her feet haven't touched the ground, have they?
No,
she's out very quickly.
But should they, though, Quentin? I mean, the reality of what she's done and how she's done it...
No, but just a small part of me says this lady is 83, I've got a mother of 88, hearing isn't great, concentration isn't always so great these days. Just a small bit of me thinks...
But your mother... No, Quentin, your mother's not at front and centre of a hugely important
she's
reception
not.
at Buckingham Palace.
I mean, it's quite difficult to talk about these things without knowing the lady involved, but possibly she overstayed her welcome there for 20 years. I don't know.
I mean,
I think the upshot of this, I might say, politically, is going to make it easier for the Prince of Wales, Prince William, to bring about change, I'd have thought, in the personnel at Buckingham Palace. I don't think there are that many octogenarians hanging around, rattling around in the palace, but there'll probably be fewer of them now.
I mean, I'm just harking back, before we come back to you again about it, just harking back to all the tributes and the nature of the tributes that were paid around the Queen's passing and the celebration of the links with the Caribbean and the roles in the Commonwealth. And if you are in the Caribbean, that sense of which, I mean, I know you say is a bad one. It's a sort of a horrible white privilege connection at the core of some of those Commonwealth links. But is there any capacity of generosity? Because I certainly don't want in any way to defend or be seen to be defending or want to defend generosity that she might have been trying to make some kind of Commonwealth connection and not meant it that way.
Look, we've all been in a situation where often a kind of older person are like, where are you from? And it's to sort of strike up a conversation about the colour of your skin. And sometimes it's not a completely awful conversation to have. But it's like this woman, and by the way, we're not talking about the woman, Ngozi, I know you're going to have her on the show later.
Yes, we are.
You have to be a pretty important, special person to be invited to Buckingham Palace, right? They don't invite any old sort of riffraff off the street. She's a really respected chief executive officer of a really important charity doing really, really important work. And I think that the point is, this woman, and I take Quentin's point about her maybe being a bit doddery and old. If she's that old and doddery, she shouldn't be doing that job, right?
Because you also feel if she's done that great work, there were many other things she could have been talking to her about, you know, and could have done a bit of research on it.
Violence.
Yes.
Just one other point quickly about the age thing. I think you could slightly make a defence about, oh, she's old and doddery, and in which case she shouldn't be there. But just recently, you know, when Will and Kate went to the Caribbean, they're young. They had they completely gaffed that up as well. Like, you know, the imagery and the optics from that trip looked like something from the 1950s. Yeah. And they're not old, and their advisors aren't old. So I do think this point, when you put it together with the Meghan and Harry stuff, and I know people that work in Palace, it is very old-fashioned. Yeah. They have got to, you know, kind of modernise a bit.
Kehinde, let's come back to you, because I wonder whether you would see something, or what you would like to see from the Palace that might change your feeling about whether things are shifting and going forward. What would that change be, or is there nothing they can do for you?
Well, I think it's difficult. And I just think about that Commonwealth connection. The Commonwealth is just the British Empire, right? The links that the royal family have to places like Jamaica, where my family is from, are deeply linked to slavery and colonialism. I mean, the fact that the Queen, the Queen is passed now, but, you know, King Charles is the head of state of the UK, is the head of state of a number of countries around the world, leads a Commonwealth of 2 billion people, most of which are black and brown, just can't be sustained. I'm sorry, like, this is an institution that its primary function is to represent whiteness. That is why our head of state is from this exclusively white family, and why when Meghan Markle joined it was remarkable. And I said before, if you think about the Commonwealth, you think about the pageantry drenched in all these colonial diamonds and gold. There is literally nothing that King Charles could do if he was serious about anti-racism other than to abolish the monarchy. And let's move on. There is nothing modern about this institution. This is just one example of many, many, many other examples.
Kehinde, that's not.
But lots of people aren't going to agree with you on that. And if we want to unite a country and find a way, look at the huge outpouring of affection at the Queen's passing, and look at the hope that was felt about a new era under King Charles. So, you know, is it literally that start, a republic, or is there anything that you could offer to try and move forward still with the monarchy in place?
And I think when we're thinking about racism, the worst ways to think about it are, one, individual people do bad things, and two, that we need to have a non-divisive conversation. These are uncomfortable things. If we're talking about serious change, it's going to make people uncomfortable. And the idea that we need to come together in harmony around this, that means we don't get serious change. I'm sorry, some institutions are just are too embedded in whiteness and white supremacy, and they need to go. And you probably won't agree with me, I have no doubt you will not, but that is the only thing you can do if you're talking about serious change in terms of representation of the country, in terms of institutions, and how we go forward. The royal family has no place in a modern Britain.
OK, so Kehinde has no hope that's the only way.
He'd have been knitting under the guillotine, that bloke.
But that, I mean, you know, that's his belief, and he believes that actually that's the only way forward. Aisha, do you share that, or would you rather? Do you feel like there is a progressive way in which the palace and the royal family can work on a situation that actually appeases that?
I'll probably take a slightly different view to Kehinde. I don't think this country does want to sort of completely get rid of the royal family. Although that might change over time in terms of younger people. This country is becoming a much more diverse country, as the census figures just show. And I think a lot of younger people don't have the same sort of slavish affection to the royal family. The royal family has to work really, really hard to persuade this new, changing Britain that they are still relevant and they still share the values of modern Britain. And for me, the big moment, and this is the thing that's such a shame, when Meghan Markle joined the royal family, it was such a big moment, because it was like, wow, this is a moment of modernity for the royal family. In a modern era, to have a woman of colour join the royal family, this is amazing. And that gave hope to a lot of people. It made people really love the royal family. A whole generation opened their hearts up to the royal family. Then they saw how Meghan Markle was treated, and she had to leave the royal family, leave the country, and I'm afraid that's left a very bitter taste in people's mouth. Then you see incidents like this, which reinforce that idea. I think I would like to see the royal family learn from this, but I don't know if I'm hopeful that's going to happen.
You're right, Kate.
That was good timing. Maybe we should... You're desperate to say something as well, which is more dramatic.
But my cough has prevented it. Do you want to speak?
Quentin?
I think that Meghan Markle, I find her hard to warm to because I see her as a character rather than as a colour. And I loved her. I thought she was terrific at first. I thought she was really an exciting personality, but I went slightly off her, I'm afraid.
And there are things that Meghan Markle has said that since been proved to not be true, which has cast aspersions. But there does appear to be a core, doesn't there, that this event has...
Lots of our viewers are saying she was right.
Yeah.
She was trying to get out on what she said, and that's reality.
She spoke out against the might of the establishment, the most powerful part of the British establishment.
Oh,
and she
rubbish.
got... Are you saying that
the royal family's not powerful
it's not
at
part
all.
of the establishment. They're not part of the establishment. They are the sort of
those things,
the
the telecameras, that's what's important.
Absolutely, and very, very
important.
important.
Where the power is.
And she got treated... So the facts remain this. We have had one person of colour in modern time join the royal family, and she was hounded out. The facts speak for themselves.
Yeah, and you could argue that actually if she wasn't powerful, or the family isn't powerful, then she was talking about her experience with the family rather like Diana did, and it feels like there hasn't been learnt those lessons.
Yeah.
Listen, we have Ngozi Fulani on the programme later on. Prince William has invited her to come to the palace if she would like to talk through everything. Is that a hope of a future?
I think William understands culture wars in a way that the older generation, and possibly me as well, find it very hard to understand. I mean, Lady Hussey, 83, in 40 years' time, Kate, if you are presenting Good Morning England, as it'll be then, I suspect you may find it hard to relate entirely to modern culture. And
you've halved her age, by the way, because she's significantly older than that already.
I was trying to be diplomatic.
Yes, you
were. You know, when you get to your 80s, I just think you probably can't engage with modern culture wars. It's just
So don't put them in that...
in the wrong arena.
OK.
So, sorry, but it still doesn't answer the question. If Prince William is so skillful at negotiating the culture wars, why did he do so many... Why was his Caribbean trip such a disaster?
Was it? I don't know if it was such a disaster. Everyone... That's now received wisdom, but I'm sure a lot of people who attended that tour probably quite enjoyed it.
Well, not really, actually, because it was seen, even in royal circles, it was conceded that it was a really bad thing. It went down really badly.
What will be...
And it just showed a lack of, like... It was very tonally unaware of what was happening, because the Caribbean is changing, these Commonwealth countries are changing. And what's interesting is a lot of these people are very affectionate towards King Charles, very affectionate to the Queen. They want to leave, though. They don't want to have a British king or queen be their head of state.
I mean, the thing is obviously this episode looks unbelievably racist. Whether or not there's racism throughout every person in the palace, we don't know, do we? But what it does say is they're getting very,
you have to say it is most unlikely.
Well, it is.
It's not exactly Ku Klux Klan headquarters.
Hang on, there's two things. It's really, really important. There is the behaviour of an individual, a bad incident, the one bad apple thing, that's an argument that's made a lot about various things. Then there's another thing, which is the culture of an organisation. So there's individual examples of racism, and then there's what's known as institutional racism, where, you're right, it's not the Ku Klux Klan headquarters, but there are practices and cultures and behaviours which reinforce a view of people, and they sort of give permission to a certain type of behaviour.
Going back to Sean's point, within the circles of which Lady Hussey is moving, those conversations aren't being had where that's not an acceptable form of interrogation of somebody, is it?
I should put that perfectly. It's about the bad apple. You can say, well, we've got a bad apple, we'll take it out and everything's fine. No, everything is not fine, because those conversations, the privilege, the confidence to be able to say that sort of stuff and to continue, the fact that she continued asking and touched her hair and things like that, that culture, the conversations she's having are allowing that sort of attitude to continue.
Quentin, are you hopeful that they will that? I mean, clearly she was in the wrong place.
It's inevitable.
Yes, and then we will see changes?
I think it's inevitable. It's happened. mean, you know, she's the old bird. She's been put in the working end of a trebuchet, and she's flying over towards Southwark at the moment.
Not just one person moving, but, I mean, this is the point.
I suspect there aren't that many of them left. I think she was probably... I mean, I don't know about this. I'm not a royal reporter. But I suspect that she was kept on a slightly sort of sentimental way in that she's been there a long time. And I think the king is maybe quite a sentimental, quite soft with his staff when it comes to that sort of thing. But he will now have been shown you've got to be more ruthless. And I think it sounds as though Camilla...
lots of people from Clarence House.
No,
I think it sounds
it's a very...
I think it sounds as though the Queen Consort has been pretty quick to get rid of the old bird too.
Well, you imagine she would have been furious because the whole point of it was something.
Yeah, the great thing about this, it seems to have been quite a well-intentioned event, and now this festival of rancour has erupted.
And also, the Queen Consort has done really great work with women's groups over the years, not just for the headlines. She's been a real supporter of a lot of brilliant women's groups, and particularly violence against women. I've attended some events at Clarence House, so it's a shame. But this is going to keep happening unless they address the structural, systemic, institutional cultures and practices within. And by the way, it's not just the royal family, it's in lots of institutions. The police...
That's the point, isn't it?
Parliament, you know, I experienced it myself and I worked in Westminster over many years. This stuff, you know, you can take out the bad apple, but unless you actually fix the rot in the orchard, it's never going to get solved.
Absolutely. And it feels like, at the very least, they need some different advice on a lot of things, don't they?
Yeah.
On a lot of things.
Aisha and Quentin staying with us. Kahindi, thank you very much for joining us this morning. It's great to get your thoughts as well. Lots of you getting in touch on this. Very sort of, you know, very much Meghan was right. A lot of you saying, I never doubted her and she's now been vindicated. But then there's a lot of sympathy for, as Quentin was saying, an 83-year-old woman, and there's a sort of vilification of what she's done, and she will be mortified this morning. We need to be sort of concerned about that. However, you know, ultimately, who's the victim in this scenario? It'll be interesting to get Ngosi's thoughts later on, won't it?